Finally, I wanted to mention two special cases that come up once in a while. The first is if you know XML already. Now, there's no assumption that you do, but if you happen to know XML already, you might have asked, well, why, if I'm loading a JavaScript file from the head section, did I use a start script tag and a separate end script tag rather than just using a script tag with a slash right at the end, a self-closing tag? Why do I have to use script, blah, 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 end script when there's no body content in between the start and the end tag? And the reason for that is that in some Internet Explorer versions, the scripts wouldn't load if you did it the top way, only if you did it the bottom way, even though you could make a legitimate argument that the top way is the proper way to do it in XML when you don't have body content. So universally all the time, regardless of what browser you expect the end users to use, you have a separate start script tag and end script tag, even though script tags in the head section have no body content, nothing that appears between the start script and the end script. The second thing that crops up once in a while is only if you're running JavaScript code from the body using document.write, if you have a less than sign, or perhaps an ampersand sign or greater than sign, in the actual body content, that might make the HTML page be illegal in terms of XML syntax. And then you have to do this weird CData section to basically escape the lesson sign, and it's a big pain in the neck and it's not worth the bother. Fortunately, this is very rare because script tags with body content themselves are very rare, and you can easily work around it by moving that code into the JavaScript file itself and then just calling the JavaScript function that uses that lesson sign, and you have no problems. Okay, I said that JavaScript is normally used in HTML pages, but what HTML version should you use? Well, you have some alternatives, but there's one pretty dominant choice. So XHTML used to be the most common HTML version for AJAX apps, applications that use JavaScript to go to the server, get some data, and come back, or dynamic HTML apps, JavaScript apps that manipulated the document object model, in other words, the HTML structure of the page. And in XHTML, all of your HTML tags are in lowercase, and it strictly follows the rules of XML. So you have to have start tags, have to correspond to end tags. Uppercase tags don't mean the same thing as lowercase tags. You have to have attributes and so forth. A second version, and the version that's more popular nowadays, is HTML5, but I say sort of, because HTML5 is actually more liberal than you probably want to be when you're using JavaScript. So the version of HTML5, or the variation of HTML5, the way that you use HTML5 is you write it as if it was XHTML, but you have some simpler tags. In particular, the doc type, the HTML start tag, the script tags, the CSS tags have some simplified versions in HTML5 that are not available in XHTML. But you follow the rules of XML, even though HTML5 doesn't strictly require you to. You always use lowercase tags, use a start tag and an end tag all the time, and so forth. And then in the past, HTML4 was quite common, but it's been eclipsed by modern innovations, and you're unlikely to use HTML4 in modern applications. Okay, to give some more detail, let's look at XHTML. It follows the rules of XML. In XML, whatever case, uppercase or lowercase or mixed case, a tag is defined as is the way that you have to use it. In XHTML, they define the tags to be lowercase, so you have to write them in lowercase. If you have a start tag, like start P for paragraph, you have to have an end tag, end P, to end the paragraph. You can't just omit it and have the browser figure it out automatically. And attribute values like type and source have to be enclosed in quotes, single quotes or double quotes. Those are the rules of XML, and XHTML follows those rules. So you have a doc type that's kind of long and complicated. I use XHTML all the time in other applications, and I don't remember that doc type. I cut and paste it in. And you have a relatively long HTML open tag. Okay, that's the bad news. The good news is that after that, your browser follows the rules, or your HTML page follows the rules of XML. You have an end tag for each start tag. You use lowercase. You have attribute values and quotes and so forth. So the major advantage of XHTML is that what you see in your text editor corresponds very directly to what the browser stores in its memory. You basically have a tree structure. You have a tag HTML. Then you have inside part of it a body tag, and inside of that you have a div tag, and inside of that you have a p tag. Each internal tag is kind of a subnode in the tree. And the way that you write it is the way that it's represented internally in the browser's memory. This is a big advantage because you can kind of visualize how you should write the JavaScript code to manipulate the HTML. Oh, go inside the body element, find the first div, find the first thing inside of it, do this to it. Whereas in some of the other HTML versions, you can leave off end tags, and end tags are assumed, and so what the browser stores internally is quite a bit different than what you wrote in the text editor. And in some of the other HTML versions, you can write things in different case. And so what you write in the text editor might be in uppercase or mixed case, but what the browser stores internally is in lowercase. And so it's very confusing. So that's a big advantage of XHTML, that you write it like XML, and so what you write is a lot like what the browser stores internally. The disadvantage is that the doc type and the HTML start tag, and a few others like the script tag, but especially doc type and HTML, are just kind of long and tedious. You know, why type in all this stuff when the browser ignores it anyhow? So enter HTML5, but kind of almost HTML5. And so the idea is that you write it like XHTML, except for the doc type HTML tag and perhaps the script tag. So you follow XML syntax. You always have an end tag, and you always use lowercase, even though HTML5 doesn't actually require this. HTML5 lets you omit end tags in a number of cases, like for P and LI and TR and TD and TH. Those are for tables and lists. And HTML5 doesn't require you to put everything in lowercase, but you do this anyway. So you're using HTML5, but you're kind of using a restricted set of HTML5, and you're not necessarily following all the rules of HTML5, but you're making use of the fact that HTML5 will let you write code in that way. So you have a simpler doc type, you have a simpler HTML tag, and as we saw earlier, you have a slightly simpler script tag. You don't have to give the type attribute. Okay, the advantage of this is if you write it as if you were doing XHTML, but with a simpler doc type and HTML tag, then the code that you write in the editor corresponds very directly to what is represented internally in the browser. And your code is a little bit shorter. Now, the disadvantage is if you're writing it as HTML5, it might not really follow all the rules. You might have some extra rules, like always put in end tags, but you might also violate some of the rules. Strictly speaking, the border attribute of table is not legal HTML5. However, browsers don't enforce the HTML version. And so even though you write the HTML5 doc type, you're allowed to violate some of the rules. Now, this bothers some people. Well, if I'm in HTML, I want to do it exactly right, and I want to be able to validate officially. And then, that's a good idea in general. Follow the specification, run a validator to make sure you haven't made an inadvertent syntax error. But table borders is a case where it's hard to reproduce this effect consistently across browsers with cascading style sheets. So there's nothing sinful about using the border attribute, even though it's not technically part of HTML5. Okay, HTML4, it does not follow the rules of XML. Tags can be uppercase, lowercase, or mixed tags, and in a number of places, end tags are not required. And so you could write it in upper, lowercase, or mixed case, but typically people wrote it in uppercase. It looks something like this. And in the past, it was used quite a lot, and it was relatively simple, but nowadays, people don't use it anymore, and I recommend use the HTML5 approach, not the HTML4 approach, for all of your examples.